Recording. Okay, some housekeeping things. We figured out this week that we have 2 more weeks of our study in Jacob. And we know that next week is going to be, there will be some people that will not be here because of art festival things and 4th of July things, but we're still gonna meet, but we don't want to finish Jacob next week. We're going to.
We'd like to give people that have been here for the whole study the chance to, Cindy, thank you. My shingles are gone. I have no remaining symptoms. Thank you for asking. No, I'm doing really good. But anyway, we don't want to finish up, and we don't want to also though rearrange and not do Bible study around the Art Center. No offense, Art Center, but so we have a couple of ideas for things that one in particular that I think none of you have heard, that kind of opens up a lot of the things that we study in Old and New Testament. So we'll still be here.
Yeah, so next week we'll do a sort of one-off, and then we will finish our study of Jacob the next week. And finishing Jacob really takes us, 400 years later and thousands of years later. So it's really important to put it all together. And that's why we want to do it that way. Does that make sense? Okay, so where we left off, Jacob is 130 years old, and he's on his way to Egypt. He makes a stop in Beersheba where he has a vision, a dream, and he gets a message from God. Because remember, Jacob, who's 130 years old, years ago, had received a message from God that he was going to be the father of a great nation, and he was supposed to be in Canaan. And now all of a sudden, his son calls him, and he's supposed to be back to Egypt. You'd wonder, am I going against God's will? He had a vision, and God reassured him that he was doing the right thing. And that was in Genesis 46, and I'm going to read verses 3 and 4. This is God talking to Jacob in a vision. I am God, he said, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you a great nation there. I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will surely bring you back. And Joseph's own hand will close your eyes. So that is where we left off. And then we actually left off at verse 6, where Jacob, all his family, all his belongings, all his cattle, etc., were on their way to Egypt.
So just on those 2 verses, I don't remember if I mentioned this last week, but there are 2 things in there that stand out. One of them is all those years later when they were going to build the temple. I think I did mention this. They had this idea that they were going to build a place where God would live. And he tells them, just like he did here, I'm going with you. And there's a point where someone gets this message. Didn't when you were nomads, when you were just out, traveling, living in tents, wasn't I always with you? Didn't I go with you then? And the message was the temple is not this place that contains Yahweh. And we do that with churches. The idea we're going to go to God's house. No, I mean, this is God's house. Your house is God's house. And he says, I go with you. You're going to do what I want you to do, and I'm going to go with you. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. And as we've done this for weeks now, this last verse, he says, don't be afraid. But the last part of the sentence where he says, Joseph's own hands will close your eyes. And that phrase definitely means when you die. And it's a comforting thing. And the combination of don't be afraid, he doesn't give Jacob the understanding you're going to live forever. I mean, you're going down there, you will die there. Your line, this great nation that I promised is still going to come about, but you're going to be there. And this son that you love, that you're going to see, will be there with you and close your eyes. And I think sometimes that we, through fear, worry about stuff, we miss out on those kind of blessings. those assurances that we have, those good things, there comes a time for all of us. There are several accounts where people are literally brought back from the dead. Once with Elijah, then Jesus, we know Lazarus, and then that young girl, I can't remember her dad's name, but he heals people of leprosy and things. But every single one of those people has now passed on. They didn't live forever. And we somehow get this idea, I think, of, well, okay, I'd like to be healed, and then again next time, and then the time after that, and this will just go on forever. It's not the way this place works. It's not the way it was designed to work. And yet we have promises that are tremendously comforting, tremendously tremendous gifts from God. That one sentence has stood out to me for weeks, that Joseph's own hands will close your eyes.
So we are now on Genesis 46, and we're starting at verse 7. And when we study and listen to other people, a lot of people just say, we're not going to do 7 through 25. And I'm not going to read 7 to 25 because I will kill 90% of these names. But Scott, first of all, is good at these names. And I think it's just, I've asked him to read it because it's still important. He's listing all the people that are with Jacob on this way down. So read as
All
much
right,
as you want.
I don't think we're gonna read the whole thing.
Okay, just start.
Let's go.
Scott, before you do
Yeah.
that, let me digress a little bit, because I get confused. Section 1, so Israel set out. You said something a couple of weeks about it, but it's not accidental that it's Israel.
Well, I said that, and I thought that in that one setting that it wasn't. But we've talked and looked, and I've spent time with it, and it switches back and forth between Israel and Jacob so much. I can't find a rule on what's going on. I don't have an explanation. Don't know.
And the reason this one came up to me, and I try to find it, is because from that second sentence, it's a vision. And it says, Jacob, Jacob. So God is talking to Jacob.
Yes,
God is talking to Israel.
yes.
And we start off with, in that paragraph with Israel, and I thought maybe there's some message here. And I'm thinking that the message is this blessing that we're talking about. It's really not Jacob, it's Israel, and then the Egyptian name that they gave him. It's another world. He's talking about his world,
Well, yeah,
a spiritual world, not.
But when we try to do that, what I think Scott's saying is we try to find out a consistency of when they switch to Jacob and then back to Israel. And just to remind everybody, remember Jacob, God renamed Jacob Israel, but then in the Bible, it goes back and forth from Jacob to Israel. And if you don't remember that, it obviously becomes very confusing, you think?
the thing that, and this is the lineage, this is the beginning of the nation Israel, which, I don't know if that's significant either, that the nation is called, contends with God or wrestles with God, but it's, it's there, but it's hard to separate the two. And what we lack, one of the things that we learned being over there is they see themselves. They got scattered all over the world. It's called diaspora, where they're just a scattered nation. And yet, no matter the distance, they see themselves as one people. But it's not just distance, it's time. And so they see themselves, they talk about we when referring back to something that happened thousands of years ago. And they see themselves as one people. And this is the thing that connects them, this idea of Israel. So he's a man, but he's also the nation. He's the founder, the progenitor of the nation. And it's a concept that's difficult for us to get our hands completely around, but it's a good thing to keep in mind. All I can say about your question, is it significant? Yeah, but as far as it switching back and forth, there's times where it switches in one paragraph, forward, backward. And I can't there, I think it's significant, but I lack the depth or the revelation to tell you.
So Genesis 46:7.
Jacob took with him to Egypt his sons and grandsons, and his daughters and granddaughters, all his offspring. Now, these are the names of the sons of Israel, Jacob and his descendants. And that's, kind of it clarifies Israel, and it says Jacob and his descendants who went to Egypt. Reuben, Jacob's firstborn. The sons of Reuben, Hanoch, Palu, Henron, Carmi. The sons of Simeon, Jemuel, Jamin, Ohad, Yachin, Zohar, and Shaul, the son of the Canaanite woman, a Canaanite woman. That we don't know much about. The sons of Levi, Gershon, Rahath, and Merari. The sons of Judah, the light's not good over here. Onan, Shelah, Perez, Zerah. But and Oman died in the land of Canaan. The sons of Perez, Hezron and Hamul. The sons of Issachar, Tolah, Puvah, Yob, and Shimon. The sons of Zebulun, Sered, Elon, and Yalid.
That's all you're gonna do.
And that's enough.
Okay. So he had 12 sons, and they talk about all 12 sons. And at the end of the very end, on verse 26, it says, all those belonging to Jacob who came to Egypt, his direct descendants, besides the wives of Jacob's sons, numbered 66 persons. And with the 2 sons who had been born to Joseph in Egypt, the members of Jacob's family who went to Egypt were 70 in all. And then, just to confuse things more, in the New Testament, Stephen is talking in Acts, and he's talking about this event. And he says Jacob brought 75 of his descendants. So there's this big scandal. Is it 70 or 75? And so we did some research in it. And the New Testament, the Old Testament, by the time Stephen was preaching in Acts, the New Testament had been written down and it had been translated from Hebrew to Greek. And in that Greek translation, they added that Joseph had 3 other sons besides the 2 that we know about, and their children, and that difference is the difference between 70 and 75.
But it wasn't the New Testament. They translated what we call the Old Testament into Greek. It's known as the Septuagint. And so during the time between when this was written and when they did the Septuagint, they knew there were 5 more descendants. And so it's being included in the book of Acts. They're describing it. What I found this week was that it says that all the ones, the descendants were 70 in number. And a lot of people want to give that great significance. There are times that numbers are very significant and they're obvious. This doesn't appear to have any real purpose other than they're letting us know that it's a big family. Like if it's the family of one person, 70 is sort of large. On the other hand, when you consider the great nation that they became, 70 is not a very big start. And so that's what's being conveyed. And then they place great store in lineage and names. So we know that people that track back all the way to them, they know a lot of the time their entire history going all the way back to that bunch that left Canaan and went to Egypt.
So we are now on verse 28 and chapter 48. Now Jacob had sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to get directions to Goshen. When Jacob's family arrived in the land of Goshen, Joseph prepared his chariot and went there to meet his father Israel. Joseph presented himself to him, embraced him, and wept profusely. Then Israel said to Joseph, "Finally, I can die, now that I have seen your face and know that you are still alive." Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, "I will go up and inform Pharaoh. My brothers and my father's household from the land of Canaan have come to me. The men are shepherds who raise livestock, and they have brought their flocks and herds and all that they own. When Pharaoh summons you and asks you, 'What is your occupation?' you are to say, 'Your servants have raised livestock ever since our youth, both we and our fathers.' Then you'll be allowed to settle in the land of Goshen, since all shepherds are detestable to the Egyptians."
So once again, sometimes these little sections have a whole lot of information in them. He goes up and meets his father. And you know, Jacob has thought for so long that he was dead.
22 years.
Joseph has known for some time now that his father mourns for him, and he finally gets a chance to meet him, and Jacob weeps profusely, which is a thing that makes Americans uncomfortable, but they express themselves differently there. And this is an amazing reunion. And Jacob says, "All right, finally I can die." And again, I don't know why people want to cling to those things and say, he's saying he wishes he could die now. No, he doesn't wish he could die. He's saying, "I'm content. I am fulfilled. I have seen something, and the thing that matters the most, I have everything I want. And so if I die today, I die content. Nothing more than that." But then
And he actually lives, just spoiler alert, 17 years after this. So he's 130 and he's going to die at 147. So he's going to get to spend the last 17 years of his life with his favorite son.
so now you remember I told you, because Joseph had already said, "You're going to go to the land of Goshen." And this is this is a plan. It's his plan. It's God's plan. We'll talk more about that. But here it is. He's saying, "You guys go ahead. I'll give you directions. I'll send somebody with you, but you go ahead and settle in down in Goshen. I'm going to go back and tell Pharaoh that you're here." Does he select the 5 yet? I always tend to get ahead.
No.
But he says that it'll be perfect. It's a great place for you to graze all the livestock. And Mary pointed out this week, the Egyptians are really good farmers. They have agriculture, for the time. They have advanced it. They don't care so much about people who raise cattle. But here's the thing. There's a group of people, they're called Hyksos, Hyksos, and they come from further over in the Middle East, more up, not exactly Canaan, but they are very aggressive and they're very good at waging war. And they come into Egypt. And it's, I think now pretty much accepted that for periods of time, the pharaohs, what we call pharaohs, were not Egyptian. They were Hyksos. And so when we studied a couple of weeks ago where they didn't want to eat at the table with the Hebrews, these are the conquering people. These are the elite people, and they consider themselves above these other folks. And there's good reason to think from historical stuff that they considered themselves better than the local Egyptians. And that's going to come into play here late, just pretty soon. But he says Goshen is going to be a great place for you because all the Egyptians think that shepherds are detestable. You can begin to understand why now. These are not native Egyptians. They're Hyksos. They are and as I mentioned, there are times where the king in Great Britain is German. when someone ascends like that, you think the kings are always British, English. No, and this is just one of those. So he already has this plan of them going into Goshen, and it gets, and he even says point blank, the Egyptians think that shepherds are detestable. And what does that mean? It means they're going to leave you alone. You're going to get down here. They think you're detestable, and they'll just let you be because they don't want to mingle with you. They don't even want to come down and check that much. So this is going to be a perfect place. And this is the big point that I've been trying to get across. This is God's plan. He didn't send Joseph ahead to rescue them from a famine. The famine was the pretext that got them all down there and got them settled into a place where they're going to be separate, where they're not going to have to compete, and they get a chance to explode and become this great nation. In history, if you have land and you're successful, somebody's going to try and take it from you. Eventually, they will. You put a few bucks together, somebody's got their hand in your pocket. And living up around Canaan, they're a small people that are new there, and there's always a threat that somebody's going to come in. So he sends them, he plans far ahead and sends them down where they're going to wind up in a place where they are protected, left alone, and free to just bloom into this great nation. It's an amazing plan. It's an incredible plan. And the idea that Joseph got sent ahead just to help avoid a famine it's the tip of the iceberg. It was to get them down there. Yes, sir.
So, I hear what you're saying. Tell me in reference to time, since you probably know, how long before, because to me, the fact that he says to them, to his family, that the Egyptians perceive shepherds or herders as detestable and abomination, also sets up for what's going to happen later, where they then become slaves of Egypt. So how long span time, if we could interject real quickly, between this great time of prosperity and the growth of the Israeli or the Jews to they become slaves?
Okay, how long does this time of prosperity last? So, and I use the word Pharaoh. The current day Egyptians get really mad about that. They claim Pharaoh, they were kings, and Pharaoh was one guy, and that other people treat it like a dynasty name. But when this king dies and a new one comes in, and then I think the next one after that is when things really begin to get dicey. What happens is that Israel, the Jews, become so populous. They're very successful. They become wealthy, and they become a lot of people, and that becomes threatening. And as you mentioned, there's a time where they are slaves, but it has a little different meaning than probably what we think of in American history, but they do become oppressed. But even under the oppression, say, and how long before the pharaohs start getting scared of them, or the kings start getting scared of them? I don't know. I think probably 100 years or so. They're down there for 400 years.
Right.
They don't come back till 400 years is when they come back.
We don't have a biblical history of that. Not really. There are some other some Egyptian historical records, and you see how they, in their hieroglyphs, how they portray shepherds, for instance, and it gets worse. They really start depicting the shepherds as being these ugly, creatures. So
I think that this week I read several generations.
It's several
Yeah.
generations,
Yeah.
it's several kings. As this king dies, but that's the best I can do. There's a period of time, but even when the Egyptians begin to take notice of them, they continue to be very prolific and very successful. The Jews have lived with oppression worldwide and come out pretty darn good. I mean, they work hard and they find a way to survive. And some of it is this unity that they have.
But prior to Exodus, I mean, it doesn't seem like this is oppression yet, you know, with certain amount of freedom. They were slaves.
By the time Moses comes, they were. They had been crying out to Yahweh to rescue them for a long time. Do I know the exact time in years? No, probably it lasts 100 years or so where they are really left alone, and then another 100 years where they begin to get noticed. But yes, by the time of Moses, they are oppressed. They are, you know, they're a slave people. But what I'm saying is, even under that, they continued. There's no question. They continued to be successful.
A people,
A people, yeah.
yeah.
And continue to
they
grow.
have a history of being somewhat forgetful of their blessings.
They do. We all do.
But as is told in the Bible. So if, as you say, it wasn't really to save his family from famine, but this is God's plan.
Yes,
Do you make the assumption then part of whatever evolves into this time of subjugation and oppression and slavery was part of God's plan, because when they were very profitable and prosperous, they maybe forgot God again?
okay, so was it part of God's plan that when they come under subjugation, when they become slaves, that's part of God's plan? And I there are times where there are things that we're told that I'm really convinced I understand parts of the plan. They're very visible. I'm not presumptuous enough but do I think it's part of the plan? Yeah, I kind of do, because that Exodus, the Passover, they are told, they're commanded to remember that and tell their children. It got to the point that when God delivered them, there was no other explanation. As a nation, they had this common history that said, this was God that rescued us. We didn't rise up under our own power. We didn't have a revolution. It wasn't a stroke of luck. We were rescued. So do I think it's part of the plan? Yeah, you asked me directly, I'll tell you directly. Yes, I do. I'm cautious, as I said last week, because people say, does that mean when something bad happens to me that's God's plan, that I suffer? And that's a very complicated issue. Things that we think are bad, you know, we're looking from a very small perspective. The answer to your question is yes, I think it was part of the plan.
You know, that's why I prefaced it by saying, because what's the first thing that they do when they are free from Egypt? What's the first thing that they do?
Well,
They turn away from God again.
yeah,
And that's when God kills a bunch of them, that, you know, literally.
and it may weed out the ones that are, you know, it's a complicated thing. Mario, I'll tell you my thought on that is that looking back at the failures and shortcomings of people in the Bible is a hobby for a lot of Christian denominations or churches or just individuals. And I think the more profitable thing is for us to see those same flaws in ourselves and be able to say, you know, how about me? Where do I fall? Do I behave just like that? And I can look at nearly all of them and say, yes, I do that, or I've done that. So did they fall short after the Exodus? Absolutely. And that should be a message to us. When things are very bad, we cry out to God. And then when things are good and we're rescued, we say, you know what? I don't really need any help. I got this under control. There's our message. Yeah.
And I think part of that message is he has always been with us and is still with us. All you gotta do is believe, follow that instruction. And
Well-
he loves you. He loves you. There's always a way home.
We are going to digress here today. I guess that's the way it is. But Gene said, you know, the message is that he's always with us and all you got to do is believe. One of my other pet things that I'm very, very cautious of is trying to make it sound like, oh, it's easy. All you gotta do is believe, oh, it's easy. It's like love your neighbor as yourself. That's all. That's harder than the entire law put together. Love your neighbor as yourself, turn the other cheek. That's hard. And when we're in those testing times, when we're in those very difficult situations, it's hard. And that's why we study. That's why we prepare, so that when those times come, we're better equipped to trust. But I've had people in churches say, it's you just do it. You just believe. You just have faith. All you got to do is, all you have to do is turn the other cheek too. But that doesn't work out. So this is the thing that we try to learn and remember. And we remember the times where we were in these situations and God was there for us. But it isn't easy. I mean, it's a difficult thing.
Chapter 47. So Joseph went and told Pharaoh, my father and my brothers with their flocks and herds and all they own have come from the land of Canaan and are now in Goshen. And he chose 5 of his brothers and presented them before Pharaoh. What is your occupation? Pharaoh asked Joseph's brothers. Your servants are shepherds, they replied, both we and our fathers. Then they said to Pharaoh, we have come to live in the land for a time because there's no pastures for flocks of your servants since the famine in the land of Canaan has been severe. So now please allow your servants to settle in the land of Goshen. Pharaoh said to Joseph, now that your father and brothers have come to you, the land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and brothers in the best part of the land. They may dwell in the land of Goshen. And if you know of any talented men among them, put them in charge of my own livestock. Then Joseph brought his father Jacob and presented him before Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. How many years have you lived? Pharaoh asked. My travels have lasted 130 years, Jacob replied. My years have been few and hard, and they have not matched the years of the travels of my fathers. Then Jacob blessed Pharaoh and departed from his presence. So Joseph settled his father and brothers in the land of Egypt and gave them property in the best part of the land, the district of Ramesses, as Pharaoh had commanded. Joseph also provided his father and brothers and all his father's household with food for their families.
So he tells his brothers, when you talk to Pharaoh, be sure and tell him that you're shepherds. You tended flocks all your life, and your fathers before you tended flocks. He knows the effect that's going to have on Pharaoh. He says, you tell him that we're down in Goshen, and if it's, if you don't mind, if you just let us stay there. So Joseph is working this thing. Why does he only pick a few of the brothers? We don't know exactly. I can think of a couple of reasons. First of all, if you haul 12 of or 11 of them in there, it's a little overwhelming. And he's, probably wise in just taking a few. And he selects, I'm sure, for whatever reason. Maybe he picks the ones who look the most like shepherds, the ones who are who don't clean up as nice as the others.
The detestable ones.
Yeah, the detestable ones. I mean, that seems plausible, but he selects a few and they go in and they do what they're told. Well, what do you guys do? Pharaoh says, what do you guys do for a living? How can you earn your keep? We're gonna give you positions. What do you do? And we're shepherds and our family's down in Goshen. So if it pleases you, could you just kind of let us stay there? And Pharaoh is being magnanimous. Pharaoh is showing off, because Joseph has made him incredibly wealthy.
And saved his country.
And saved his country, yeah. And Pharaoh has no doubt. So I'm going to put you in the choicest land in all of Egypt. Now, is it the choicest land? If it was, it wouldn't be as empty as it is. It's good for grazing livestock, and they don't prioritize doing that. So it kind of works out for Pharaoh too. He can make a big show of this, and he also thinks, oh, good, I don't have to kick anybody off any farmland. I can run them off down there. And he says, so yeah, I mean, I'm just, you can go there. And if there are any really talented men among you, put them in charge of my flocks too. Don't forget that. This is where Pharaoh's animals are, or that's where they're going to be. But what happens is that Jacob's brothers wind up being in charge. They even get some authority over Pharaoh's own flocks. And this is helpful. You know, if you're taking care of Pharaoh's flocks, I guess you're going to get a little spending money too. I mean, not only do they get to run their cattle, but they're going to be overseers. Joseph gives them land. No, that's within his power to do. He has all the authority nearly of Pharaoh. Pharaoh could overrule him, but by and large, he can give away food, he can give away land, he can give away money, just like the king. And so he gives them the land, he settles them in Goshen, and I think we've covered that, you know, ad nauseum. But then he brings his father in, and here's Jacob, 130 years old. And Jacob comes in. By now, Pharaoh knows that he's a shepherd. He tends animals, but he's the father of a great man, and so they honor him. And Jacob's first thing is to bless Pharaoh. Now imagine that Pharaoh's a king, and he's going to come in and issue a blessing, and it's understood that that is a blessing of Yahweh on the king. And the king probably thinks, well, that's sort of quaint, right? This old shepherd man is blessing me. I'm Pharaoh. I'm the richest guy right now in the known world. And you know, he says, how old are you anyway? Well, I'm 130. But the days of my journey, and that word is like wandering, but the days of my wandering are 130 years. But even at that, he says, I'm nothing compared to my forefathers. I'm just a guy. I'm just a guy. I've lived kind of a long time, but I'm nothing in in comparison to those who came before me. They talk for a minute, and then Jacob leaves and blesses Pharaoh again on the way out. He is not afraid to be counted as a servant of Yahweh. He makes it clear to the king. And there are a lot of people who would be intimidated and just, bow down. Jacob blesses them. He gives a blessing and it's of Yahweh to the Pharaoh, to the most powerful guy in the world.
And you have to go back and think about Jacob's life. He wasn't always there. I mean, remember, he wrestled with God. But at this point at 130, his walk with God is pretty strong at 130. He knows who Yahweh is and that Yahweh has been with him.
This is the same guy, and you're right, thank you, because this is the same guy who cheated his brother out of his birthright. This is the same guy who's known as the grasper or the trickster, who does the deal with Laban, where he gets to keep all the striped and spotted goats, and he begins selective breeding, so he leaves with a bunch of wealth. Same guy. And now,
but not the same guy.
But not the same guy. It hasn't come full circle. It's come 180 degrees. He's going to the other direction with it. And you see that change in Jacob. By the end, he's talking about Yahweh to Pharaoh.
There was no.
When Joseph was asked to interpret dreams and so forth, he made it pretty clear, it's not me.
He did.
I'm not hearing that in Jacob. I can see the change of fear not. I can see the change of who I am, Jacob am. I don't even care if there's a favor or not, but I'm not hearing the credit.
Well, brevity of words and several thousand years, the detail that we get is he walks in and it's understood, I think, that what he's saying is he's delivering a blessing, from Yahweh through him, that he's like a representative. Does it actually spell it out? It's a fair point. I have to surmise, but I'm fairly convinced. You do see, though, that on the way down to Egypt, he gets a vision, a dream of Yahweh speaking directly to him. And it says, Jacob, Jacob, and Jacob's response is, here I am. That's a kind of a telltale. It happens with Samuel. Here I am. What can I do, or how can I serve you? I think it's understood enough that I'm fairly confident saying Jacob is committed to Yahweh.
We're now we're on 47 verse 13, and we're back to understanding Joseph's role in dealing with famine. There was no food, however, in all the region because the famine was so severe. The lands of Egypt and Canaan have been exhausted by the famine. Joseph collected all the money to be found in the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan in exchange for the grain they were buying, and he brought it into Pharaoh's palace. When the money from all the land of Egypt and Canaan was gone, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us food. Why should we die before your eyes? For our funds have run out." "Then bring me your livestock," said Joseph. "Since the money is gone, I will sell you food in exchange for your livestock." So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and he gave them food in exchange for their horses, their flocks and herds, and their donkeys. Throughout that year, he provided them with food in exchange for all their livestock.
Let's stop there because so the famine has gotten severe. It says there's no food. There are still cattle. It's not like summer in the Kalahari or something where everything dries up and the animals die at the dried up water hole. But the food is exhausted. There is not enough to survive. And he says, come in and buy grain. They give him all their money. They exhaust the money, and they come back now. It's a year later or whatever. They say, we don't have any more money to pay you, and we're going to starve. And if we die when the famine is over, there won't be anybody to work the land. And and it does say, by the way, the money that came in, the silver that comes in, he takes that and puts it in front of Pharaoh. Pharaoh is now fabulously wealthy. He has virtually all of the money wealth in Egypt. And that seems really mean. People tend to look at this. We listen to the commentaries and read them, and they talk about what a mean thing that was. First of all, you've got to say, on the other hand, well, first, Joseph is there to serve Pharaoh. That's his commitment. And he's doing a fabulous job of it. And he's kept the people alive for a year or more.
We're probably in year 3 or 4.
3 or 4 actually by this point. But to take the money, remember what I told you, that Pharaoh, I think this king is not a native Egyptian, is Hyksos. And so for him to extract all the money from that's what kings do if they get a shot, at least a lot of them. He doesn't have a connection, I don't think, to the native Egyptians, but he likes Joseph. Joseph has made him extremely wealthy. And then Joseph says, well, then bring me your livestock, bring me all your animals, and you can buy food. And where does the livestock go? Well, it goes into Pharaoh's flocks. And who's tending Pharaoh's flocks? Joseph's family. It's part of the deal. And is it harsh? It's harsh. That tends to be the way these things go.
When that year was over, they came to him the second year and said, "We cannot hide from our Lord that our money is gone and all our livestock belongs to you. There's nothing left for our Lord except our bodies and our land. Why should we perish before your eyes, we and our land as well? Purchase us and our land in exchange for food. Then we, along with our land, will be slaves to Pharaoh. Give us seed that we may live and not die, and that the land may not become desolate." So Joseph acquired for Pharaoh all the land in Egypt. The Egyptians, one and all, sold their fields because the famine was so severe upon them. The land became Pharaoh's, and Joseph reduced the people to servitude from one end of Egypt to the other. However, he did not acquire the priest portion of the land, for it had been given to them by Pharaoh. They ate the rations that Pharaoh had supplied, so they did not sell their land. Then Joseph said to the people, now that I've acquired you and your land for Pharaoh this day, here is seed for you to sow in the land. At harvest time, you are to give a fifth of it to Pharaoh, and 4/5 will be yours as seed for the field and food for yourselves and your households and children. You have saved our lives, they said. We have found favor in our Lord's eyes, and we will be Pharaoh's servants. So Joseph established a law that a fifth of the produce belongs to Pharaoh, and it is in effect in the land of Egypt to this day. Only the priest's land does not belong to Pharaoh.
So yeah, after the money's gone, the livestock are gone, they come back and they look, we're desperate, we're dying here. You got to give us more food. All we have left is our land and ourselves, and we'll become. So Mario mentioned early about the Israel becoming slaves, essentially. When it says it gave them over, they gave themselves over to servitude, they are property. They are slaves. Slave has different meanings in different times and different places. It still says you belong to Pharaoh. Therefore, all your descendants belong to Pharaoh.
And these are the Egyptians, yeah.
And now keep in mind what I say, that I think Pharaoh, this king, is not Egyptian. I think he doesn't have a connection to the people. If you come in, you can conquer the government, but the people who have land, if you start taking everything away from them, they're going to rise up. That's not the way these things, but now they reach a point, they're so desperate, they're willing to sell their land and themselves to Pharaoh in exchange for food. And you notice it says seed. It's not, nothing is growing, not much is growing, but they can't grow enough to survive. But they not only deliver themselves and their land, but they're thanking for it. You've saved our lives. Joseph then makes it a law that after this is over, remember, he charged them 20%. They took 20% during the 7 fat years. That 20% is going to become permanent now. So they're going to get, Pharaoh is going to get 20% from the Egyptians forever. You're now worse than sharecroppers. Your slaves, we'll let you have 80, but Pharaoh is going to get 20% of everything. That's a better deal than Visa and MasterCard get. What do they get? Like 3% of everything that gets bought? They get 20% of everything grown. Pharaoh's house does. So Joseph has made Pharaoh beyond wealthy. He has been an incredible servant. So when it says that Joseph made a law that said from now on, everybody gives 20% of what they grow, 20% of the increase, Joseph is making laws. I mean, that would always be the king's function. Pharaoh has turned over everything to him. And as long as he serves well, he gets to do whatever he wants to. But you do see now, Mario, that the Egyptian people became slaves before the Hebrew people became slaves.
And the other thing to remember here is that Pharaoh is still really grateful for Joseph. I mean, he believed him so much. It was 7 years of prosperity. And now we're like in year 6 of 6 years of the worst famine ever. And he had, what he said was true, and he kept these people alive. I mean, he managed this well. Whether we like the way he managed it, I'm not sure anybody else could have managed it. Yes.
A pertinent question I've had since we've been talking about the famine is, was there ever a plan to irrigate from the Nile? The banks up and down.
They did. The farming, the heaviest part of the farming was concentrated along the Nile. And so I don't know, does that mean did the water level drop? Could they not get enough water to raise enough food? But the heaviest agriculture was along the Nile. Yeah, they did. We don't get all the details, But we've seen times, you see the Dust Bowl. That wasn't the entire country, but there was big farming country up there, and it, that's part of the Great Depression. So, it's not ever as simple as saying plants quit growing, but they can't raise enough food to feed everybody. That much we know. That's a famine.
Now the Israelites, now we're back to Jacob and his family. Now the Israelites settled in the land of Egypt in the region of Goshen. They acquired property there and became fruitful and increased greatly in number. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years, and the length of his life was 147 years. When the time drew near for Israel to die, he called his son Joseph and said to him, "If I have found favor in your eyes, put your hand under my thigh and promise to show me kindness and faithfulness. Do not bury me in Egypt, but when I lie down with my fathers, carry me out of Egypt and bury me with them." Joseph answered, "I will do as you have requested. Swear to me," Jacob said. So Joseph swore to him, and Israel bowed in worship at the head of his bed.
Obviously, Jacob doesn't know this is going to be a 400-year thing, but he says, I don't want to be buried down here. Up there in Canaan, that's our land. That's the land promised. And so he makes him come in, he makes Joseph, he knows he's about to die, and he makes him swear an oath. And this whole thing of the hand under the thigh, I don't know how it works. I've tried to find out, but it is a ritual that they have for a sacred oath. And his father says, "I want you to promise me you're going to do what I ask. He says, when the time comes, when I die, don't leave me here. Carry my body out of Egypt and back up to our land where I belong." And Joseph swears to him that he will do that. And, again, the spoiler is that 400 years later, during the Exodus, we're told they take what's left of Jacob back up there with them and bury him. And there's a cave or a piece of property that he wants to be buried in. So the big thing that we need to get out of this part of it is the people in Egypt have sold everything they own, themselves, just to stay alive. The children of Israel, the descendants, the lineage of Messiah have been brought up to a place or down to a place where they acquire property. They don't have to give theirs up. They acquire property. They have a place where their flocks just explode. That's the providence of God, the providing of God. This was a long plan. And so while everything else seems to fall apart, he made a way for them to become the great nation that he had promised they would become. And here's Jacob at the end, making sure that this promise that was his land wouldn't be lost. There's this confidence, we aren't going to be here forever. We're going to leave and go back to the land that God promised us, and he's certain of it. And when it happens, take me with you.
One of the things I always love about the Bible is you like read a chapter and you think this part's chronological, but you're going along and then you realize the skip of years. So this part is talking about Jacob lives for 17 years. So we figure he got to there 2 years into the 7 years of the famine. So the famine is now over, okay? The famine has been over for a number of years. So first of all, the land is probably prospering again. This is 17 years. So it's 15 years. Let me see if I'm doing that right. It's many years. It's probably 12 years after the famine. And that's all in the same chapter. And now it says he's dying. And now you have to realize the next 3 chapters is of him dying. So this dying process takes 3 chapters, and we go 17 years in one paragraph. So you
What
have
you-
to skip the
We do
years.
lose the flow of time.
Yeah.
When things go like this, but the next chapters, we're gonna pick it up in 2 weeks. We're still gonna be here next week with something else, but we're gonna come back to this. There is prophecy. This is one of the really amazing, the part that's coming up, one of the really amazing things in the Old Testament. And what you're gonna see is from Jacob in his dying moments, prophesying about how some things will go. And these words were recorded long before the things came to fruition. It's not written after the fact. We know that the words in those next couple of chapters existed before they came true. It is amazing prophecy. And we're going to go back and see some things. Remember the brother that took Jacob's concubine, not the brother, the son, Reuben. You remember the two brothers that went in and killed those people? Now we're going to see that come to fruition. I told you way back there are consequences. We're going to see the consequences. God, we ask for the faith to remember these things in the times when we're tested, in the times when things get difficult for us. And we're told that being tested brings character, and yet that seems like small consolation when we're going through it. So the prayer I have is the reminder, there are people among this group who are going through or have recently been through these times, and they're dealing with the aftermath. Help us to remember, take these words, put them in our hearts, bring them out when we get in those times, and help us as a group to remember to be there and help remind our brothers and sisters that these times are sometimes exactly what we need to find our way back to you. Help us as we meet people. It's always that. Every week, it's always that. You send people and put them in our lives. Use these times, these words to remind us that you love them too, that they're also your children, and that often we're intended to be the instruments that show your love to a world that needs it. Amen.
So like Scott says, we're going to be here next week. And now I remember Carol is in Houston with her daughter, Naya, and Naya's going to be here next week in person. So even if you guys, so those of you who've seen Naya online from Portugal, and now she's in Virginia, she will be here in person next week. So even if you're doing the art festival, you can still come to Sunday school in the morning.
And Mary usually gives us guidance about what we study, but on a one-off, there's the word witness. A witness is extremely important in Jewish law. And it's something that will probably help you at other times as you study. So we may do just a section on the importance of witnesses in Jewish law. It sounds dry, it really isn't. And you'll see it comes into play all through the Bible.
Okay, thank you guys. You can unmute yourself. There you go. Hi, Jack. I didn't get to say hello to you.
Hi, hello. Yeah, it seemed like my machine kind of failed on me 2 or 3 times, but it got back with you guys. I had some blank spots there for a few minutes where it all stopped.
There you go. Coming down next weekend?
Yes,
Cool. Cool.
Bye, y'all. Thank you. Thank you all. We're pushing for you, girl. Thank you.
Have a good week, everybody.
you too.
Have a
Oh,
good day, you guys.
yes.